Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Dougherty. I'm the co-founder of a company called Medicat Health here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'm also an entrepreneur, teach entrepreneurship at MIT. And we have an awesome panel here. We start at the far end. We have, each person will do a brief introduction, but we have Robin at the end, Erica, Kevin, and then John. And these, we're going to try to help young entrepreneurs figure some things out. And even if you're an old entrepreneur like me, you can still learn something from smart people like this. So when I ask you each question, just to give a brief, the first time a brief, we'll do 20 minutes here, ask each a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience, okay? So first question I want to ask that I get all the time, which is like when you get your first job, which is, you know, I need experience to get the job, but no one will hire me. So the question is very much like when you're trying to break into a hospital or a doctor group or a pharmacy, how do you get your foot in the door? How do you get someone to trust you when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have much experience, you don't have made much of a track record? How do you get someone to get you the foot in the door? We'll start.
So a lot of it does go back to relationships, and you need good relationships to get in. So often your first customer, your first round of fans will come from people that know you well and trust you. If you don't have that relationship, it's going to cost you a lot. So, and I'll give you a very simple example. If you don't know the VCs and they don't know you, it's going to be very expensive from an equity perspective to go in. Similar, if you go to a hospital group or something to get in, if they don't know you, it'll end up being a small pilot. So if you don't have the relationships, it's great to get somebody, partner somebody who has relationships, and that drops the cost of the first partnership.
Kevin?
Jim, did you want us to do quick intros first?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm Kevin Kumler. I lead the health systems business at ZocDoc. You know, we're working with lots of health systems across the country, and that first one is tough. And to John's point, if you know somebody, that helps a lot. If you don't, in our experience, you need to find that person in the organization who really cares about what you're doing and has a need. Because to work with especially the larger systems, they're fairly risk averse as an institution. So you need somebody who's so frustrated by what's going on internally that they're going to push through the legal and contracting process, the IT connectivity issues to give you a chance.
Hi, I'm Erica. I head up strategy at Proteus, which is a digital medicines company. And I would say signing up early on some good board members or advisors is critical. Not only is that a test of whether you're able to articulate your vision and what you're trying to do and get some influential people to buy into that, but they can serve as probably the best door openers there are.
Hi, my name is Robin Swanson. I work for Withings. Withings makes connected devices that help people take care of their health. And I would say the best, at least for myself, getting into the healthcare providers was partnering with a lot of our partners that knew people, building relationships from that, and then even willing to do pilots for free to be able to test the concept.
Okay, so presume you're successful, you get your first pilot. Now you have to make it work. And you know, when you mentioned these big institutions are risk averse. So you get inside and all of a sudden, you know, there's an old expression that even, everyone loves disruption except for those who are being disrupted. And it's fun for everybody, but it's bad for that person. So once you get inside, there are going to be vested interests, there are going to be people with different points of view. How do you manage the sick pilot to make it successful? Once you get your foot in the door, it's awesome, you got in. Now you have to make it, the flame, keep it alive. How do you do that? How do you protect your babies from being destroyed by people who have different interests?
I'll take just a quick step back. I'm John Souza, the head of the consumer business for Physician Interactive. We actually started as MedHelp, started a company in 2006 and sold it about a year ago to Merck Pharmaceuticals and combined it with Physician Interactive. And I've gone through and done startups in different sectors. Health is a difficult sector overall to do startups in. When you talk about getting your, going and getting your projects to do well, I think what really helps you is you get senior buy-in. If you find a senior person who's really bought in, it helps you get over the people with vested interests, that love the hurdles you run into. It's very hard to go in, I think, from a lower level and push it up and make it successful. Because the first hurdle you run into, it gets killed. So I think you need to make sure you have the sponsorship at a high level to get it done.
Kevin?
Yeah, one of the panels that happened earlier today, there were several innovation groups from different health systems, and I thought their advice was spot on, which is twofold. One, define before the pilot starts what success is for scale up. If you haven't done that in advance when the pilot's over, you won't know if it's been successful or not. And the second is identify that person who will be responsible for scaling it and pull them forward into the pilot. The kiss of death is getting put in an innovation group where that person cares about piloting a whole bunch of things, but then eventually somebody else is going to be responsible for rolling this out. So pull that person forward.
Yeah, I would echo that and maybe just say by then it's too late. And if you haven't up front aligned on what you're prepared to deliver with what your partner customer is prepared to invest in, don't do a pilot. And I think the pilot mentality is one of the most dangerous things for new entrepreneurs. It's one of the best opportunities. But if you are going to, say, an innovation group, as you mentioned, to pilot and show, and you haven't up front decided even what the scope of what it is you're prepared to offer is, you're going to get into a world of hurt. And there's a big difference between if you're an app company or a platform company. And I happen to work with a platform company. If you don't go in, be prepared to offer the entire end-to-end offering that'll help your customer, and they're not willing to invest, and it is an investment to make a platform work, I wouldn't do a pilot. You have to go in with that mindset, which I think is what we're all saying, alignment with your partner customer about what the scope of what you're trying to accomplish really is.
And I completely agree, especially in terms of setting their expectations up front, as we have technology and sometimes there's hiccups. There's user error as well that can lead to some complications and make the whole pilot look like it isn't working. So I think it's really important to be very hands-on, and as John said, you definitely need to have the senior buy-in with the project that you're launching.
So Erica, you had mentioned before about getting senior advisors and other more credible people than you are, especially as a young entrepreneur. You said you thought it was important. I'd like to talk to the other panelists too. Why do you think it's important, and how do you go about doing it, especially if you don't have tons of relationships? How do you approach somebody and get them to agree to be either an advisor to you or an investor to you, and then lend you some of that credibility on your website, and then maybe give pitches so that you look a little more credible than maybe you actually are?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think most small companies in the healthcare industry tend to go to a medical KOL first, so a doctor, and that is very important because if you have a product that needs to be introduced into a care process, you have to start there, and you have to have that perspective. But I think some entrepreneurs think that their venture backers are the right business advisors, and I was in venture capital for many years, so I'm talking about myself as well. I think better is, as I said before, to try to recruit, persuade, collaborate with a senior business leader, not because you're trying necessarily to get a deal with them or sell something to them, but early on, look at what you want to become. In the case of Proteus, we happened to recruit as our chairman, and this is going back 12 years ago, someone who was the CEO of a company at that point we wanted to be like. Mm-hmm. And again, if you can't persuade that person of your vision, you're not ready. If you can, then you've got a person who's got connections. You still need that medical KOL, but I think that business leader of who you want to be is critical. Set yourself as a goal. If I can persuade that person, I might have a business here,
right?
Not just the venture capitalists. Again, full disclosure, I was one, so I'm allowed to say that.
Recovering venture capitalist.
I'm a recovering lot of things.
So do you compensate these people with equity? How do you rope them in?
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. And the currency you have at the beginning is your own innovative thinking, of course, but the potential to give options and shares early on in the company when you're not valued so high.
Right.
Things get tougher when your valuation goes higher. Another good news, bad news thing.
I'm supposed to, I know I'm supposed to be the moderator, but actually what we have done in the past is given equity that vests 100% on the day they get the equity, and we keep them whole through Series A. And that really actually goes a long way to making them think we're committed to making them some money. So anyway, that's just an idea.
Just
thoughts,
a
John?
couple of practical thoughts as we've gone through advisors. One is you want to get advisors that actually know things that you're not comfortable with. So if you're very strong in medical, get people who understand business or technology. Often you get people who are very strong in one field and get advisors that have the same expertise, and that's dangerous. So getting the diversity is very important. The second is actually, I found that having 1-year term for advisors worked best for me. So that you upfront, often separating from an advisor can be tough, and your needs from advisors change very quickly. So I found that in 1 year you can renew it for another 1 year if you need it, but otherwise it gives you a natural transition to bring in new advisors. And then in terms of compensation, I found giving equity is good, but I'd love to get people who will invest as well, because it shows you whether they really believe in it. So as soon as you get them to complement the equity you're giving them with money that they put in, I find that they're a lot more committed to helping you.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. So I would echo what others are saying. Many of our early, as John was saying, investors, so not just advisors who are willing to give their time, but those who invested money, both helped add credibility and knowledge. So for those who aren't familiar with ZocDoc, we're the largest digital health marketplace. And Jeff Bezos's Bezos Expeditions was one of our early investors. Obviously, Amazon understands that marketplace space very, very well. We're a SaaS business. Mark Benioff was one of our early investors, the CEO of Salesforce.com. His knowledge of how they've expanded that business was extremely influential. And then later on, Vinod Khosla, for those of you who heard him speak earlier, Khosla Ventures has been a big investor. So each step of the way, we've added people who've added both capital and ideas, and that helped ensure that they were as committed as we were to the idea.
If I could just make one
sure.
other comment. Your board members and advisors obviously are going to evolve as your company evolves. One observation I can make from the companies I've worked with is you almost always wait until too late to get the next strong capability on your board or in your advisor group. So what do I mean by that? In the case of Proteus, again, we're kind of at the intersection of the pharmaceutical industry, the device industry, data analytics services. We're kind of in there. And I would say if I look back on, and we have some marvelous board members now, but it's kind of like I wish we'd gotten each of the new capabilities we added a little sooner. And it's hard because when you bring folks in kind of ahead of the time when you actually need them, you kind of pick at them and you kind of don't listen to them and they kind of get frustrated, but you really need to listen to them. So when we brought in Myrtle Potter, who was the president of Genentech, we weren't quite ready to hear her, and we had a little tension there, but we had to hear her. And when we've brought in John Simons, who was the CFO of Novartis and AstraZeneca, we were kind of not ready to hear him, but we had to listen to him. So you sometimes have to push the envelope for them and for you. And just looking at some of the companies I've worked with, not limited just to Proteus, I wish we'd brought in those key capabilities sooner. A key capability to bring in, and you got to time it just right, is your customer. So someone who represents your customer community, whether that's health systems or payers or what have you, you got to bring them in at the right time and be prepared to listen to them.
Any comments?
Well, we're a little bit different because we're a French-based company, and where we're based, the French are actually helping tech companies to help them create more positions within and promote technology in France. So that's a little bit different than what you guys are dealing with. And then we, of course, have different advisors on our boards, whether it's medical advisors. We have a lot of research advisors as well as payer advisors as well.
So let's turn it around a little bit. So I'll start with you again, Erica. So looking at the pattern recognition, are there 1 or 2 or even 3 mistakes that almost always lead to startup death, failure? Things that people do, they do something too early, they do it too late, something that is a recurring theme that almost always makes life really hard or assures the death of the enterprise.
The thing I mentioned earlier, I think I would put as number one based on my experience is that you don't align the scope of what you're prepared to offer with the scope of what your customer partner is prepared to invest in. And so if you have just a standalone app and say you're going to transform care, well, that's silly. You're not integrated into the EMR or integrated in the care pathways of your customer. Maybe you're focused just on the patient, which is fine. But if you then don't align that with what you're expecting your customer to actually purchase, that can be a problem. I can speak from the experience with Proteus. We are a platform. That's a big honking thing, and it's very hard to pull off. It requires kind of end-to-end, from making medicines to collecting the data to putting up a web portal to integrating that to EMRs to changing the care. All that stuff is a lot. You only want to go down that path if you've identified partners who are willing to invest and not just pilot, right? So I think that alignment, the scope of what you're offering, and have great clarity. If you're not going to provide the full solution, know who else is and collaborate with them and make that work. And if you are going to do the whole enchilada, the whole end-to-end, you better raise a lot of money, and you better have high expectations, not only for you, but for your customers. And only go for the ones who say, I know I need to invest. I'm with you on what we're trying to change. Got it.
You guys have any comments? Patterns that you recognize that are death to?
I'd say the word that Erica used that we obsess about is focus.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in the organization, the executive team, spends a lot of time thinking about this. In the last 3 years, we've expanded to all 50 states. We've gone from 150 employees to 700. And as you bring in more smart, talented people, they come in with more great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And to be really good, you have to be super, super focused on what's success for you, what's success for your customers, and how do you deliver on that. And then maybe you're in the right to do a couple of other things, but not the full litany of things you'd like to do.
And I think when you think about a startup, a lot of the mistakes actually I think are made as you set up the company. So as you think about it, you can sort of sanity check your idea. Is it really a big market, a growing market, or are you going after a small niche? Is this a small idea? So I think sanity checking your idea up front is really important. But also, when you look at it in terms of how you set the company up, there are a lot of companies that are successful, but are not successful for the entrepreneurs. Countless numbers where they've sold and the entrepreneurs have made nothing. So I think in terms of thinking about how you structure the deal is very important. In the end, the investors are on the other side of the table, and you need to make it makes sense for all of the employees as well. So structuring is important. Reading the documents is critical. The number of people I think that have not read all the legal documents and assume that the lawyers were taking care of it, that's the kiss of death. You'll end up with a document that a term will come back to bite you later on. And last is, no entrepreneur has ever died of dilution. What I mean by that is that if you run out of money, you're dead. But if you've raised a lot of money, you get over diluted, at least you have a chance to survive. So I think often people make the mistake of not raising enough money or raising more money than you think you need, because you might get diluted, you may make a little bit less, but as soon as you run out of money, you're out of options.
Robin, anything you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, just from Withings' viewpoint, we, when you were talking about, the end-to-end in healthcare, like we make products for individuals to be able to take care of their health, and we want it to be easy. So we utilize our partners. We're partnered with over 200 different companies, whether it's EHRs or apps. But that allows us to, we're not trying to be everything to one person. We're trying to always focus on the individual person using that and enhance that with our partnerships.
Excellent. So you just touched on an interesting point. So I remember when I first came back up here, I took an angel investing class, and the very first speaker said, you only raise as much money as you need and little tiny trickles. And the very last person said, you take money whenever you can get it. They're polar opposites, right? I'd be interested in your perspectives. I mean, you sort of gave your answer away, but that was one of the questions. So you would recommend to entrepreneurs that if they can get money, they just take it whenever they can grab it, or should they do it in dollops as they grow the company so they can get higher valuations and less dilution?
Well, and actually, I'll tell you just a slight side note and give you an interesting analogy. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're like a person in the desert that's looking for water. if you have friends and family, they'll always share water with you. So if you have access to that, it's great. You can go through and drive that. If you can find yourself a private placement person, they'll tell you, look, we know people with water, but you have to share the water with us. If you go to VCs, or if you go to angels, angels will tell you, look, I believe in you. I found water before, and I trust you can find it. VCs, they'll sign you up for bottled water. They'll tell you, look, I believe you can find it, and give us the water and the bottles back at the end of it. So you need to look at the sources of capital, and each source of capital has different things. If you optimize it and everything goes well, you'll do really well. But you need to be able to make sure that things go well. If it doesn't, you just need. And actually, Tesla is a great case study where if you look at the original founders of Tesla, he didn't make that much money because they had a hiccup.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you can avoid hiccups, which are hard to do, then you can optimize it. If you might have a hiccup, you better take as much as you can.
Right. Kevin?
I like John's analogy a lot. I'd say the big challenge is you don't know how wide the desert is and how much water you're going to need. If you had that certainty, you know exactly how far you're willing to be diluted. But to his point, the capital you raise gives you a lot more options. So we had raised another round this fall that gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of the business decisions we're able to make now and which customers we take on, which products we build, and that flexibility means a lot.
So take as much water as you can if you can get it. Robin, and
We raised $30 million last year, which has allowed us to invest in product development, but we're still very, very conservative about raising more money because we're profitable as well. So that's also going into our company as we grow.
so let's talk a little bit about founding teams. Have you observed, everyone says it's important to have at least 2 founders, maybe more. In terms of how founding teams come together, what do you look for in a founding team? I mean, are you looking for balanced skill sets? Are you looking for, what are the things that you think make the most successful founding teams?
So I've done the full gamut. I've started with a large founding team, small founding team, and done on my own as well. So it's very, very different dynamics. If you've worked with somebody before, that makes a very big difference. So the probability, first I will say, as you think about having a founding partner, having agreements are critical because at some point things may not go well and you better be able to fall back on those agreements. If you've worked with a person before, much higher probability that you'll end still speaking with that person than if you didn't. If you work with friends, there's a good chance you'll not speak to a person at the end of it if you haven't worked with that friend before. The big advantage of having a founding partner is you go through tremendous ups and downs through to starting. And it's great to have somebody that you can actually go through and talk about all of that. When you're running the company, you can't go to a company and have a huge down. You don't have that luxury. You have to be performing all the time. So founding partner takes that away. But it's having gone through all of it, it is tricky. It's tough, and especially if you haven't done the agreements when you're friends, it is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And our founding team was 3 members. They all knew each other in advance. They had
worked previously
They
together?
had worked together in previous companies, not as founders together, but in prior companies, so they understood each other, and they also complement each other extremely well, both skill-wise and then personality-wise, which, from my observation, makes a huge difference.
So Eric, as a VC, you've invested in many companies. What are the attributes of the best founding teams?
I'm not sure I could point to people, they know each other, they don't. I've seen success in both cases. I do think pretty quickly once you get beyond the first 3 or 4 key folks, you do need to look at people who will debate with you and will challenge you and will be annoying to you. Because again, it's a 2-edged sword. You have a strong vision. You must have to be willing to be an entrepreneur and to start something. You have to have a strong constitution and strong vision, but that doesn't mean you're right. And so bringing in purposefully some people are going to challenge you and invite you in, and that's a very hard thing to do. Sometimes your investors are those people, but it's better, I think, to have some of those people internally but I don't think there's, it really does, I think some of the others are saying this, it really depends on the nature of what your mission is, how broad the scope is, where you're trying to take it. You know, there are a lot of good people out there, and sometimes it's easy to look to the left and the right of people you know, but they're really good people out there, and if you have a strong idea, you're going to attract them, but you kind of have to invite them, mm-hmm. or, you know, you'll never find out about them.
So we have two founders, and they both work together in the telecom industry. They do complement each other very well. One is an engineer, very into the nuts and bolts of things, and the other one is an innovator, the big visionary of the design of our products and determining which products we're going to make.
So let's talk a little about pivots. Most startups seem to pivot. One of the things you look for in an entrepreneur is someone who's passionate and driven, but there has to be a limit sometimes where you have to recognize that maybe you've made some incorrect assumptions. And you have to pivot. Sometimes it's embarrassing. You don't want to tell your investors. You don't want to tell your friends. Can you talk about pivots that you've either observed or experienced, and what would you recommend entrepreneurs look for when it becomes apparent that they need to pivot?
So I think if you cannot pivot, you should never be an entrepreneur. You're a professional pivoter. And I think it goes on every front. The quicker you can recognize it and the faster you can pivot, the better you are. And it'll be on every front. You could make a hire that you think is going to work well. As soon as you recognize it doesn't, how fast can you pivot? And in the healthcare industry, I think pivoting is very important. Is just the triangles you get into, because you're trying to improve the health of people who may not be paying for that service. And just the fact that you have these triangles that you have to deal with means you need to be able to pivot quickly. You need to focus initially in one segment to go and get there, but you may find out once you've done that focus, you need to attract somebody else to pay for it. And so for us, a good example of a pivot is we spend a lot of time building these large healthcare communities. We get about 18 million people a month coming into that. But we had to do a pivot where we took the system that we built and started selling that to payers and providers in order to monetize it. And if we didn't do that, we'd have run into trouble. So you need to be able to recognize it quickly, pivot, and feel comfortable with you doing that.
I like that. Professional pivoter.
Exactly.
It's like a
My shoes are meant for that, yeah.
So pivot's such a nice euphemism for
right.
Ran into a brick wall that we couldn't find a way around, so
right.
we're going to go in another direction. For us, I'd say we haven't had a hard pivot like that where we've abandoned what we were working on because it wasn't working. But we have, I guess you could say, pivoted in new directions. So our business was built on private practice physicians and dentists. We spent the first 4 years in New York just getting it right, the basic product right. Then we started to expand. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the vast majority of our growth hasn't come from those private practices. That business is still growing, but there's a limited amount of them out there, and that market's shrinking. Our health systems customers, where the growth is coming from. More physicians are employed. We're proven in that space now. So if you look at where we're investing more in health systems than in private practices. And you could call that a pivot, but it's more just listening to feedback from the market and capturing that trend.
It's focus, right?
Yep.
That's more focus than pivot. But
Yeah, and I would, concur that, at some point, a pivot must come to focus. When you're early on, and again, depending on the scope of what you're doing, you do need some optionality. You owe it to your team, to your investors, that everything isn't based on this one molecule or this one customer or this one geography. So you owe your team some optionality. But at a certain point, and when you've attracted people, primarily investors, employees, because of a certain part, one of those options that they see and that you're making good progress on, you've got to drive it home or you're not going to get anywhere. And so the biggest pivot to me is when, as a company, you get to the point where you switch from maintaining optionality to committing.
right.
And that it could mean you're doing 2 or 3 small things, but you're committing. And that's tough, right? I mean, that's where the risks really get high, but that's where the rewards will be too. So.
Yes, so we definitely pivoted on one project that we did that was actually with a high-profile client, and we worked together with that client to build something for them based on their feedback, and we worked with them for probably about a year. It was a lot of time and a lot of effort on both sides, and after that year, just determined that it was something that we needed to scrap. We just long-term could see that it wasn't going to work the way that we envisioned it was going to work, and just completely stopped the whole project.
Okay, one last question from me, then we open it up. So, culture. So every company has a culture. Most cultures form in a non-strategic way. They just sort of happen. What are the things that you would advise new entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, about thinking about as culture as they build their companies? What are the 2 or 3 key cultural things that they should think about right away as they form the company, not a year from then when it's already whatever it is that it already is?
Mm-hmm.
So I think culture is critical, and I think you have to choose it before your first hire. So I spent a lot of time thinking about culture, and I knew the types of things I wanted. I wanted a culture where people didn't love Fridays and hate Mondays. Where they actually, I wanted a culture where at 5 p.m. you don't feel the breeze of everybody running out the door. And I thought about the things. I wanted it to feel like a family. I wanted one where people cared about it, and that drives a lot in terms of how you organize it and the type of people you're going to hire. So you hired the first few hires are people that bought into the culture, and they're going to hire other people that go through and drive it. But it's set up different. We don't have artificial deadlines. There's a lot of respect for other people. We do spend a lot of time with each other. So it drove it. If you don't set up that, you end up with a culture that you're not sure what it is.
Right.
But the danger as well is, for example, if you're young and you hire a lot of young people, that sets up one type of culture. It may be good, it may be bad. If you're just driven by making money on stock and you hire a lot of people like that, the first time you have a bump, what does that do to the company? So I think you have to be very proactive about choosing your culture and setting the initial tone of that up front.
I just want to say, a company I ran in New York, our motto was TGIM, and God, it's Monday. That's we wanted people to be happy about coming in on a Monday morning,
Exactly.
not dreading it. So,
Yep.
sorry.
Yeah, I'd say culture, you need to be very intentional about it, and it should be specific to you and your organization. So with a lot of the clients we work with, large health systems, you can often take their values, and if you covered up the logo, you might not know which organization that was. It's service, patient care, integrity, quality, efficiency. For us, we've tried to make our core values things that speak to what we do. And we've reinforced those over time and re-articulated them over time. So when we talk about what ZocDoc's about, we talk about being caring, smart, and simple. And then that's reinforced through all of the behaviors, the activities. Our rooms are named after our core values. We have an awards show every year at the end of the year called the Ollies that's modeled after the Oscars, where somebody's getting one of those core values awards, which is one of the highest honors you can get in the company. And thinking about how to reinforce those as you scale, when you don't have the first 3 people that you hired on that, it's now 700 people. If you're not intentional about that, that culture erodes over time.
So we name our conference rooms after leaders. And so Churchill, Washington, Rosa Parks, and some people you wouldn't expect. And we have our employees, we have a competition every time we expand and have new conference rooms. And employees can nominate a leader to name that conference room. And they give a full presentation on the accomplishments of this person and the why they deserve to have a conference room named after them. And things like that really do reinforce whatever your core values are. And for us, leadership is one of those, that every employee is a leader, needs to step up to the plate to do that. And I think some of those things really do make a difference, as much as the taglines that you use and the colors in your in your buildings, and whether you have a cafeteria, don't have a cafeteria, whether you wear jeans or you don't wear jeans, that stuff changes, believe me. I feel sort of, even within Proteus, I've kind of gone from May to December, just in the short years I've been at Proteus. And believe me, our culture and physically what you see and the words we use has changed. But some of the fundamentals like leadership, another one is quality, those we've tried to keep steady. And I think that's the best you can hope for. You can't, I think as you evolve, you can't say, oh, we're still going to have a Google-like free cafeteria and that's the epitome of our culture. It's got to be some more fundamental things, and you got to let people be people, within that. So, I sometimes have a bit of a different picture of culture. It is important that at that point in time you hire people who fit with your values and can work with people. But I think it's less important if they, dress a certain way or have certain personality qualities. It's almost the fundamentals that have to stick around.
Final.
Yeah, so it's interesting on culture. I had mentioned in the beginning, we are a French-based company, and we do have a U.S. operations, but the majority of our designers, engineers, CEO are based in Paris. And what our CEO has done is he's opened up the line of communication, which is huge, especially when you're overseas. We don't get the same information sometimes because there would be a delay, but actually what he's done is a lot of communications with us to update us on what's going on, but also to be able to allow us to provide feedback and feel comfortable providing feedback on what's going on, whether it's something bad, good, or indifferent, basically. I think that's hugely important. And also letting people own a project. Let them have ownership in it, be responsible for it. Maybe they make mistakes. Most mistakes are fixable. But it's very important, I think, in letting people have ownership in their position, no matter what it is.
So the key conclusion in that is it has to be intentional and strategic and purposeful, not accidental, which is how most companies' cultures form, right? They just evolve, and if you have a great relationship with each other, it's good. If you don't, it's bad. And it's really hard to change once you've solidified it. So let's open it up to the audience. I don't know, we bring the lights up, I guess, and people with, here's over here. There we go. Can you just identify yourself and turn the mic on, please? Can we get the mic on, please? There, it's working.
You can hear it.
Okay, great. Mike Rubin, Dulcian Health, New Jersey. So we're three founders, and I'm just curious, and I know that there's no magic formula, and we all brought different talents to the table. Some brought most of the capital, some brought marketing experience, some brought connections. So everybody brought something, and we're doing quite well. My question is with regards to equity, how you split up the pot, how that math might work. Obviously, there's got to be some to incite future employees to come on board with us. You mentioned advisors and board members and how that plays into it, all around coming up with an agreement and not losing our friends.
I would just say quick out of that. The way I think about splitting equity is by thinking about the roles you play. So as a founder, you have a founder equity. As an employee, you'll have a position. You could be CEO, and you have equity for that. You could be an investor, get equity for it. So you split it up very intentionally between each of those roles. And you may say we're all founders, so the founder portion of it, we'll divide it equally. On the other hand, one of us is going to be the CEO, the other person is going to be a key developer. We're going to have very different equity for those portions of it. And finally, somebody's going to put money in. I think setting it up like that makes it very easy to go through and define it and makes it the splitting easier up front. The second part of that, just to know that as you go through, those roles are very important in deciding what people do later on. So just because you're a founder is not a role at a company. You don't get any intrinsic rights for being. So just make sure that people realize that once you're done with the founding, you now have an employee position and you have to go for that that position. And then third is the realization that how people deliver against initial equity will always be different from what you expect. And so you just need to either resign yourself that you're okay with it or have a mechanism built in to take account of that.
Any other comments on equity? It's tough.
Yeah, I would say, and I don't I think they're, this is ground that's been pretty well trodden, but founders are just that, founders. And one of your roles as a founder is to grow the enterprise and create value. And you're only going to do that with other people. And you're only going to do that with substantial partners and customers, and you're only going to do that with investors. And so and this is just my personal view, taking, a good chunk, but a, reasonable chunk of that in terms of founder share makes sense, is almost that you're telegraphing to the other stakeholders in your company that I just started the darn thing. I need all of you to make it into something. So it may sound kind of obvious, but I think, setting aside at the beginning, as you said, the sufficient shares for your employees who are really going to be the ones who make your vision come alive. The stakeholders that you may not even know about yet, you need to reward them in some way. So you almost, you almost have to be a little humble, right? Because you're not going to grow a company just with 3 founders.
On the far side here, sir.
Hi, my name is Anant. I am an internal medicine resident at the Brigham. My question is for the group. If you guys could place yourselves in some of our shoes, those of us who are young, first-time entrepreneurs who want to enter the healthcare space, what would you, if you were in our shoes, look at as being the most ripe opportunities for startups within healthcare?
Well, that's, the good thing about healthcare is it's extremely broken. So I'll take a slightly different cut at it. What I did with the first company is I did not want to go down the path of trying to get pilots and all. So we did this company completely bootstrapped, no external financing. And what I did is I found customers who were willing to pay me upfront for the work I was going to do for them. It's very tough to do, but if you can do that, you find a real pain point. If somebody says, this is painful enough for me, that I'll actually pay you if you'll solve my problem, you're onto something. So we went that way. We said, we got a $3 million deal, somebody saying, we'll pay you upfront, go through and solve this problem. If you can get people to put their money there, you're onto something big. So I think it's a great way to sort of validate the market you're going after.
We have right on time, actually. Any other quick questions before we end this session? Right here?
Dion Kotze from Discovery Health in South Africa. So my question would be, if you had the choice between addressing 1 or 2 things, which one would you put money towards? The first one is, would you put money towards the fragmentation in the delivery of healthcare? Or would you put money towards making sure that people are healthy enough that they don't actually have to use healthcare? So is it fragmentation of healthcare versus wellness, effectively?
So the latter one is, I think, very interesting, but it drives you down the path of getting the people to pay for it. So the payment is it's a very attractive one. The first one is near-term revenue. So I think the first one is, if you think about a short-term, I can see the business model, I can see where the money comes from. The first one's a much easier one to tackle. The second one, long-term, I think is very attractive, but finding a way to monetize it is tough.
And the fragmentation is the challenge we're tackling today, right? Taking a disparate set of supply and a disparate set of patients who are looking for care and creating an aggregated marketplace. And to John's point, there's a real business model there in the near term. For the health, it is a very long-term payoff. So you're effectively trying to figure out how to get Medicare to pay for it.
Okay, we've run out of time, so let's thank the panel. Thank you. Great job. And I think we're done for the day.
Well, thank you.
Right, thank you.
We only ran over by 50 seconds. That's pretty good, actually. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's hard to see how many are out there, but